All right, we are live. I'm Father James, and this is the Barely Protestant YouTube channel. And we've got a special guest with us today. We'll call him Not Our Guy. Now, before we talked, well, first of all, how are you doing, Not Our Guy?
I am hanging in there.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. You have a very your profile picture of yourself is very concerning. I'll just say that. Yeah, it's very unfortunate that you look like that as an adult. Anyway, no.
Well, I'm locked
So I
into
do
it
want to.
because I can't change it
Right.
now because I've had it forever, and so I think everyone on X in those circles recognizes it. So I usually put a Santa hat on it for Christmas, but if I change it
Hmm.
beyond that, I think it'll actually hurt my ability to have some reach. You know?
Yes. Now, I do want to say this for people who follow me, say on X or whatever. I, um, I know who Not Our Guy is. I'm generally not a fan of just sort of anonymous accounts. One of the things I really dislike about them is that there is no accountability. So if you have an anonymous account on, say, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, or some other social media, usually it's on X, if your pastor or priest knows who you are, knows your account and all that sort of stuff, I am far more accepting of that sort of thing. But if you are just sort of some sort of random, not random, but if you're some sort of person who just lets nobody know who what your account is, so that you have no sort of accountability, that's one of the issues I have with anonymous accounts. So I have complained about that in the past, and I still maintain that, but that's just a clarification so people don't think I'm a hypocrite. And Not Our Guy agrees as well, correct? I
Yeah,
think,
we're
right?
pretty much on the same page with that. I've been doxxed both by the left several years ago, and then more recently by right wing folks on Twitter who actually found my original left wing docs. And so for that reason, I still maintain a public facing anonymity. I will say that
Mm,
anybody who is actually interested in figuring out who I am can find out pretty quickly on X. But just to prevent people reaching out to my family or harassing people, I've decided to remain this way. But I think everyone that I've spoken to on a podcast, pretty much with maybe one exception that I can think of, I believe they know the church that I attend and my full name. And I think I told you that too, James.
you did,
So
yes, yes.
yeah.
All right, so we're having you on tonight because you have talked quite a bit about World War II, the post-war consensus, Hitler, the Holocaust, and we've even touched on Stone Choir and such. And I thought it would be really good to help. Now, what I want to say, we're going to talk about these subjects. What I want to say is, at least from my perspective, and I think you agree with me on this, is that I am not at all one of these people who say that you are not allowed to ask questions, you are not allowed to challenge the narrative, or have questions, or even be skeptical about things. What we should always be doing is seeking truth, and part of seeking truth is a healthy dose of skepticism. And it makes sense to have skepticism in various fields because of how the world has gone, especially in the past 5 years. Do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into a lot of the World War II stuff, I'd like to say, like, I do think that my perspective, especially maybe on some stuff related to like the average opinion of the Ruchmach and stuff like that, would probably diverge from the bulk of scholarship as it exists right now that I understand it. So
Mm.
I don't think that having just any perspective that happens to not be shared by the majority of historians or academia should be something that should be condemned necessarily. My issues usually arise around where I don't think due diligence has been put into the actual investigation of some of these matters.
All right, and another thing for credentials and all, uh, where would you place yourself politically? Just give us a little bit about yourself politically, just so we understand if you're woke or not, or anything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, socially, I'm very right wing, so I want like things like gay marriage repealed. I'm generally in favor of the state giving some degree of special recognition to Trinitarian Christianity specifically. I don't really have a
Mhm.
problem with things like that.
Mhm.
I probably also lean more free market with some economic policy, with maybe the exception of things like H-1B visas and that kind of thing. I think that when it comes to immigration policy, we should lock it down in perpetuity for quite a long time, regardless.
So
So
basically zero kind of thing.
yeah, I would say like if we could do 50 to 100 years with nobody getting in period, that would be best. I think culturally that would be best for everybody. I think we have massive sections of the U.S. that have not assimilated, and I do think assimilation can occur within nations. I just think it takes way longer than we've let it happen. And I don't know if you saw recently the like 55 million visa holders in the U.S. online. Did you see the statement about that?
No.
Yeah, somebody in the Trump administration mentioned that there's like 55 million visa holders in the United States, and I think that's just a completely unbelievable number. And we need to be rectifying this by bringing back down bring that down to reality. So in comparison to everybody that I ever knew, not everybody, I guess I knew in college, which maybe we get into later, but most everyone that I have ever known, I'm pretty right wing. And I've had a lot of conversations with people that are left wing that are pretty convinced that I'm an extremist on the right. I've also had conversations with people who are more neocon that think that I'm relatively extreme when it comes to things like the state recognizing Trinitarian Christianity as being favored, right? That kind of thing. And the only people that I've really been able to discover that I may be more left wing than are this sort of sphere of what's getting to be known as Christian nationalists, but not necessarily even guys like Doug Wilson, but even guys beyond that, like the Corey Mallers and maybe some other people that I don't even know if they accept that term. Guys that I think have some affinity for Nazi Germany. And so that's kind of who I would be to the left of, but most everybody else to the other side would be to the right of them.
Yeah, I find myself in the broadly in the same sort of sphere as you are. So I don't consider myself at all left-wing. I was actually recently called left-wing because I am not opposed to interracial marriage. So I guess that makes me radically left-wing or whatever. But whatever. And but I'm very strong on immigration. I don't like obviously the illegal immigration, but I don't like the massive amounts of even legal immigration. I think that we can we should actually try to figure out who we are as a nation, So this is not something coming from people who are just wanting a sort of swath of immigrants, both legal and illegal, coming into the nation. These are people, you and I, who are looking at these questions that are being asked about World War II and seeing what the truth is behind them. So with that understood, let's go ahead and start with well, I'll let you sort of lead off where however you want to start. I was thinking of just starting with World War II, maybe what leads up to World War II, and sort of maybe Hitler's motivations and what we have evidence for. But I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really, when I first got into this, it wasn't because I have some sort of undying interest in World War II history, right? So I first became interested in this because I met some guys in college that were pretty involved in far-right identitarian politics. And so I'm talking like the old school Identity Europa guys, which then became American Identity Movement, which then a lot of those guys kind of ultimately got picked up by Patriot Front and some of these other groups, if you guys have seen those in the news. And yeah, several of those guys that I had met and hung out with quite extensively. I mean, some of those guys I talked to for hundreds of hours in person in college. Was that a lot of them were believers or professed to be believers. And there was sort of a disconnect in my mind based on how I understood the history of World War II and the way they seem to conceptualize it. And I'll be honest, for a while there, I wasn't quite sure if they were correct, in the sense that I sort of felt for a period that, oh, you know what, maybe this was like the entire narrative of World War II and the Holocaust and everything involved in that. Maybe this is this has been propagandized to such a degree that I don't know if it occurred at all, right? Or if Hitler actually was anti-Christian. Maybe this was a narrative that was fabricated, right? So I definitely sort of questioned that for a period, and had a lot of conversations with these type of guys. And what I ultimately came around to through doing research into primary documents and things like this, Goebbels' diary to be a primary source, things we'll go into later as well, was that I do think the premise of my account was correct, that Hitler hated Christ. And that's a little hyperbolic, depending on how you want to define that. But at an absolute minimum, he was not a Christian. And I don't think that the fundamental value system that animated the Nazis or the National Socialists in Germany in that period was Christian. I think there were Christian people involved in it. I think there were a lot of people, I'd say millions of individuals that were German at the time that were professing Christian, were professing Christians, that remained professing Christians throughout the war while supporting Hitler. But I don't think that the actual ideology was underpinned by a Christian worldview. And I also don't think that Hitler was a Christian either. And so after looking into all that, I began seeing more sections in my political sphere on the right start to laud Hitler as, a Christian prince. You may have heard that term being thrown around in some sort of Christian national spaces, right? And I felt like that was pretty perverse in the sense that I didn't really see a need for it, but I also felt like it was wrong just on the basis that if you're claiming to be a Christian nationalist, big C Christian nationalist, the idea that you would make sort of the figurehead or somebody that needs to be rehabilitated in your movement, Hitler didn't make any kind of sense to me. Like that seemed to be a serious disconnect. And so I started just reading sources, and I made a Twitter account to just kind of dump everything into, because at the time this was Twitter, not X yet. And as I started dumping more and more of these things that I had found in various different books, Richard Weikhart's book was like really the primary impetus behind my big super thread, which is on my Substack, which I've put all there today. And I just kept dumping it on Twitter, and the more I posted it on Twitter, the more folks that I had that interacted with me, and it grew and grew. And I've had thousands of people send that thread to other people in conversations, reference specific documents that I've cited before, and that kind of thing. And what's interesting is I've interacted with a lot of people that used to sort of hold to the idea that maybe Hitler was a Christian prince, and maybe this has all been perverted throughout history, who have changed their minds based on kind of what I've shown them about the topic. And then I've had another section of folks who are seemingly very ardent defenders of Hitler no matter what I show them. And I'm kind of at the point where I don't really know what to do with those folks. So I'm just trying to pick up everybody that I think still kind of has an open mind about the topic. But everything is so reactionary right now in politics. It seems like the guys that want to defend Hitler no matter what is they sort of hold sway, at least to some degree, in some of these discourses, just even based on how passionate they are.
No, So what I would say, sorry, I got distracted by one of the questions here or statements here. When it comes to what I have seen with the question about Hitler and all is there's this common phrase that's brought up, no enemies to my right. It's not as popular as it was at least a few months ago. And so there's this idea of like the impropriety at best and sort of moral, I guess, compromise or whatever at worst of attacking people, quote, to your right because they are maybe more okay with something like a Hitlerian sort of approach to politics and to the nation state and all that. What are your thoughts on that claim of no enemies to my right?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways that this has kind of been deployed. And the first way is just purely pragmatic, and it's, hey, the left is the bigger threat. The people that are to the right of me that are fighting right now are at least pushing the Overton window, and so it doesn't make any sense for me publicly to condemn these people. And then there's a a more flawed perspective, which is the idea that to those of us to the right, we should not be worried about applying the same moral standards as we do to the left, in terms of expecting consistency as well as expecting a degree of basic righteousness and things like this. And I have less of an issue with the purely pragmatic component, although I do think that you should at minimum privately be correcting people to your right, and things like this. But what I've seen more and more of is no enemies of the right interpreted more as we don't have equal scales in how we interpret righteousness depending upon your beliefs about politics. And I don't appreciate that. For instance, I've seen memes on X where people will joke or talk about, I'm not anti-abortion or pro-abortion. My question is, what color is the child? Right? I've seen memes like that have circulated pretty prominently around, in some of these circles. And you could say, okay, well, let's apply no enemies to the right to this, and say, okay, well, the people posting that are, Hitlerian, so they're to the right of me. Does that mean that I have some degree of obligation to not be repulsed by this and to speak against this, to say, hey, this is deeply evil, right? I mean, it seems like as Christians, if our highest allegiance is to Christ, and it should be, then we don't get to filter our moral perspective through our political compass. What comes first is our beliefs about righteousness, and how we apply that needs to be consistent. And wherever that leads us is where we fall on the political spectrum, not the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. And if I could add to that, one of the big points that I make, well, first there's no, I won't put that point. I'll first start with this big one, at least. We as Christians believe that Jesus Christ himself is the way, the truth, and the life in a very literal sense. So to not care about what the actual truth is because, well, that person is, quote, to my right, which the minor point I was going to make is like, I'm not even convinced that they are strictly speaking to the right. In some sense, you could say that, but I think there's a case to be made that they're actually on the left. But
like, what does that even mean at this point? When you get to the extremes, it doesn't mean much at all. Yeah.
I know people in real life who are basically Marxists, in the sense of fomenting envy. They just put it in sort of towards the races rather than necessarily the classes, although they mix that together as well. Like, the Jews are always the rich people and the white people are, I guess, oppressed and pushed down by the Jews. And I'm like, that's just a Marxist narrative. So I'm like, well, are you really to the right when you're using Marxist sort of argumentation, even though you're not consciously maybe saying that? But anyway, we should care about the truth. So when a particular person, let's say that person is actually genuinely, quote, to my right, or I guess not quote, but anyway, let's say they are genuinely to my right, and they're pushing these narratives. If those narratives are actually false, we actually do have to care about that. Now, we can prioritize things, but at the very end of the day, we still need to make sure that what we are saying is actually true. And I've noticed with a lot of the people online who are pushing these particular narratives, truth does not often seem to be a big concern, because I will point out something that is wrong, and the person I'm speaking with will then simply move on to the next argument. I go, wait a minute. Why are we moving on to the? Can we recognize the fact that what you had just said was actually wrong? Are you going to now like rescind that? Are you actually going to think over this and say, hey, maybe I should sort of consider all this stuff now? So I mean, that's one of the issues I do have with a lot of this.
Yeah, and I would say that what has sort of occurred, and I think anybody who's been involved in politics, especially since 2016, on the right especially, but I think both ends of the spectrum have maybe noticed that there is a trend to denigrate the idea of being principled. That being principled is some sort of like, that's the perspective of some people who are addicted to losing, right? That's the kind
Yes.
of that's
Oh
the
yeah.
kind of idea that I see, especially in some of the more might makes right Nietzschean kind of right wing spaces.
Yes.
Is mocking boomers for being neocons and making fun of the idea of like, well, as long as we have principles, it doesn't matter if we lose. And on some level, I can appreciate that when it's an excuse to just not fight for righteousness. Um, but I will say that it is sort of, at this point, in my opinion, sort of morphed into an amoral political philosophy. And I think this is highlighted by guys like Carl Schmitt, who's often held up by some of the Christian, quote unquote, Christian nationalist guys as being an excellent political theorist that we should be paying attention to and follow when deciding on tactical things. And his whole thing was highly amoral.
Mm-hmm.
It was very reliant upon the will to power and the will of the people as being the only thing that really mattered in politics more broadly, and things like this. Keith Woods actually recently had a great article about this, if you're interested in that topic, where he points some of this out. And I don't see how that's compatible with a biblical worldview. It seems to me that sort of what's even been described by folks on their side, Machiavellian perspective about morality and principle in the political sphere, is not compatible.
I think a Nietzschean would be a better maybe analogy.
Yeah,
or a comparison, maybe.
That's all kind of in that same amoral soup.
Yeah.
But I've seen Machiavellian even held up by certain, I can't even think of the individual off the top of my head now. I've tweeted about it before, but by different people in the Christian nationalist space, where we need to be more Machiavellian. Like I've seen that as a statement that's been made. And that sort of thing, when it's tied up, especially with the entire interpretation of World War II, leads me to not really have a lot of respect for the alternative perspective to mine, just because if you're admitting to me, hey, what really matters is power and political prominence and your ability to hold sway in the social discourse, not the truth, I'm not going to, in good faith, assume that your World War II revisionism is being done in a way that I think is actually truth seeking. And I haven't seen anything except sort of the idea that we've accepted the presupposition that World War II has been used as a bludgeon against the right, so therefore we have to rehabilitate Hitler. I haven't seen, hey, let's approach this objectively. Let's look at the things that Hitler's actually said. Let's do this. It's always, let's go dig out this, evangelical pastor from the period who wrote propaganda for National Socialism and hold this up as being like, the prominent
representation.
And so that's the kind of thing that I've seen, and it's growing, and it concerns me. And that's one of the reasons I initially started my account, was to get some of this information out there to people that I think were still interested in the actual substantive truth of the topic. And I think people have responded to it pretty well. I'm moving into some of the more, less about the theology in Nazi Germany and Hitler, but into some of the more Holocaust-related stuff. I have a very long YouTube video that will be coming out in the next couple months, hopefully by the end of the year, responding to Stone Choir on that topic. Because I think that there's just so many people that are looking for what they think is truth, or that what they want to find is truthful, and they're finding ideologically charged hatchet jobs. And I want to be something. I want to be a source of something that I think is authentic and representative of what actually happened, right?
Yeah. This is not just an online thing for me. I've actually had to come across quite a few people I know who in real life are fans of like the Stone Choir, big pushers of this sort of pro-Nazi, pro-Hitler narrative. And I have had them multiple people tell me to my face, that principles do not matter, that just winning is all that matters. And that's where I say, well, then you've compromised the gospel. Then you don't believe Christ is the way, the truth, the life. You don't believe that actually following the truth is important, literally by your own sort of admission. So it's very concerning that there is this complete rejection by people who claim to be Christians of the faith, a complete rejection of the very concept of truth itself, giving into a very postmodern sort of approach to life. Although, of course, it precedes postmodernism, like we talked about with Nietzsche and Machiavelli. But with all that understood, let's go ahead and dive into some of the information there when it comes to Hitler himself. So, the sort of let me lay out the general narrative I feel like I get from a lot of the very pro Stone Choir, pro Hitler crowd in especially X, but even in real life. There's this idea that Hitler was just sort of wanting a very nice, peaceful German state, and just these Jews were just getting in the way of it, sort of frustrating him at every point. So he decides to round them up. And then I guess maybe he was given permission to go into Austria, to Poland, maybe France gave a little bit of pushback or something, and finally, the British were maybe paid off by some Jews or something to just start randomly attacking Germany for no reason whatsoever. I mean, this sounds silly hearing it, but this is kind of the narrative I get with a lot of people. So, can you help us sort of understand the actual narrative of World War II and give some examples of that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of different arguments surrounding the motivations for Hitler invading Poland initially, which really kicks off the entire thing and then brings the UK into the war. You have to remember, at the beginning of World War II, Hitler was already really laying the groundwork for the idea of associating Bolshevism, which the National Socialists were vehemently against, with Jews, right? And to some extent, this was not without basis to the degree that there were Jewish people that were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, I have shared articles by various different people, and I can send you some we can throw in the show notes maybe after this as well, about how that has been exaggerated to the degree that it's being, that Bolshevism is now considered to be a purely Jewish idea or something, or that all of the commandants or a massive percentage of the commandants were Jewish and things like this, stuff that is not very well substantiated. But before even the invasion of Poland, Hitler was laying the groundwork for viewing all Jews as a collective. And I don't mean just religious Jews. I mean people that just happen to have Jewish genetic heritage generally. As being intrinsically tied to communism. And so to combat communism, it was a necessity in his mind to combat Jewry. I tend to think that maybe in Hitler's heart of hearts, his issue was primarily with Jews and he tacked communism onto it, as opposed to vice versa. I don't know. Really, I really can't ascertain that one way or the other, but I do think that those were conflated to such a degree that that's what was the initial impetus for a lot of what we would eventually call the Holocaust, especially the latter half of the war. And the other thing that happens during the entire narrative, so Hitler invades Poland, things like this, ultimately invades Norway. After Britain gets involved, all this happens, France, etc. Is the Jews are rounded up into camps, concentration camps. They are eventually sent east to Poland and some of these other places, places that ultimately end up at Auschwitz and Dachau and Majdanek, these camps. And the public perception was, we have to control the Jews, and it was passed off as the idea of what is the Jewish question, which is, what are we doing? What are we going to do with the Jews? Because they're such a problem, right? And it's pretty clear, given Hitler's statements, especially later in the war. I mean, he directly says we need to exterminate Jewry, right? That that the ultimate conclusion of this was the mass killing of Jews in those death camps in the East, but also a lot of them killed just by shooting, clearing out villages, clearing out ghettos and things like this all over. People also
before you continue, I want to give a thank you to thank you, Fragamemnon, for the super chat. Very generous. I really greatly appreciate it. No comment or question, just appreciate the hard work on the channel. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. God bless.
Awesome.
All right, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. So, a lot of them were sent east to eventually extermination camps, places like we call Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz was actually a complex of which Auschwitz-Birkenau was part of, funnily enough, that people don't really understand that either. But a lot of the deaths of Jews were during the period they were in concentration camps through malnourishment, things like this. Ultimately, the ones that were left were sent east, and then Goebbels tells us in his diary that 60% of them will be liquidated and 40% of them will be used for hard labor. That's the estimate for how many would be capable of working versus not.
May I interrupt your thought for just a second?
Ahead.
Because if you want to deal with this later, that's fine. But I want to point out that a lot of the people I talk to will point out, or argue at least, that Joseph Goebbels' diary is actually false. Do you want to address that now, or do you want to address that later?
Yeah, we can go ahead and address that now. So okay. Goebbels' diary. So when Goebbels started writing his diary, I have to check for the specific years here, but the earlier entries in his diary were actually handwritten by himself. Later entries were transcribed and then ultimately put on microfiche plates. So they were actually typed up. We presume that they were typed up from handwritten documents that he gave to his secretary, that he preserved by them converting it into microfiche. And immediately following the war, we discover, some of the pages of his diary, especially the early handwritten portions, were discovered, I believe, in Berlin. And they're not really known if they are accurate or not. They get published. We don't really know if they're valid. There's sort of a continuing question on that topic. That's immediately following the war, pretty quickly. They get published, but there's some disagreement about it. The handwritten portions, especially. And the glass plates that were made for all the later parts of the diary are ultimately discovered by David Irving, who is a Holocaust revisionist himself. Well, actually, it's not discovered by Irving, but he goes, once it's discovered, and validates it in the Russian archive after the fall of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union falls, suddenly the West gets access to the archives in the Soviet Union, or in Russia, which used to be the Soviet Union. And he goes in, looks at these microfiche plates, which there's thousands of pages of them, because he kept the diary for many, many years. And these microfiche are the size of like your pinky nail or your thumbnail, like somewhere between that. And they are essentially what are periodic scans of the typed up documents that were typed up on a typewriter from the period. And they were discovered in a sealed container. There was no evidence that it had been opened before. The microfiche itself was dated to the period. And when we compared the sections that we did have from Berlin before that were handwritten to the sections that were transcribed later, like the remainder of the diary, they match exactly. So they're verbatim what was written down by Goebbels by hand. Okay. Not only this, David Irving, who is a revisionist and has every reason to reject them because they contain content that pretty explicitly affirms that the Holocaust was occurring, like the entry where he references 60% would be liquidated when they go east and 40% would be used for hard labor. He validates them and says they are without a doubt authentic, and in fact bases his entire book on Joseph Goebbels on this diary. I mean, it's like 90% of the cliff notes or whatever, or the citations in that book are from that diary. And not only this, we've also got things like Rosenberg's diary, which was also discovered long after the war. This one was completely handwritten, and you can look at every single page of it online if you want high resolution scans, where Rosenberg's diary records the same instances of statements by Hitler that Goebbels does. So they're both recording. For instance, I think Keith Woods points this out. There's an entry on April 9th, 1941, which is actually recorded April 8th in Goebbels. So Rosenberg records it on the 9th, Goebbels records it on the 8th. One of them says that Hitler said, "Antiquity did not know two evils, Christianity and syphilis. The other one says Christianity and syphilis made humanity unhappy and unfree. And there is a discussion about whether or not this was Hitler quoting Schopenhauer or not. And they both record this on the same date. And they're in two different documents that were not together at the same time, except for when they were written and held by different sources. One was held in the United States, one was held by the Soviet Union until the Soviet Union fell. So you're talking like in the middle of a Cold War. So the idea of corroboration or collaboration to fake this would be impossible. And not only this, there isn't really a method to alter microfiche. So if the microfiche were made at the time for Goebbels' diary, they're the size of your pinky nail, right? So how would they have been altered in any way that would have changed what was actually written on them, right? That just doesn't make sense. And there's a reason why even revisionists in the sphere have come to accept the Goebbels diary as authentic, and they've adjusted a lot of their perspectives and views around this to be able to maintain a degree of revisionism about the Holocaust while still acknowledging that passage is correct. But the funny thing about that too is that the Goebbels diary contains some of the most vehement statements by Hitler against Christianity. So on my thread on my Substack, you can see a lot of these. But for instance, December 13th, 1941, Goebbels records Hitler as stating, "There is an insoluble contradiction between the Christian and Germanic historic worldview. However, this contradiction cannot be resolved during the war, but after the war, we must step up to solve this contradiction. I see a possible solution only in the further consolidation of the National Socialist worldview." So he's like, I can't make, National Socialism and Christianity work together. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pick National Socialism. He says that clearly, recorded by Goebbels on those microfiche, found after the fall of the Soviet Union and validated by these revisionists. And you still will have people say, no, that there's no way that can't be, but it is. It just is the case. So that's kind of that's a real roundabout way of describing it, but I hope that helps.
That's very thorough. I really appreciate that, because I was going to maybe press a bit more to see, like, well, how, are there ways that can be gotten around it? But it seems very difficult. And what a lot of people seem to sort of ignore is this recognition that when you are, let's say you're trying to make this false narrative of something as big and broad as the Holocaust and the World War II itself and sort of the inner dialogues that Hitler's having with his men and all that sort of stuff. Those things have to be written down if they're fake, and they have to be corroborated in a way to where even on sort of like minor details, they happen to be they work together, kind of thing, on things that are otherwise not important and such. So if you're going to make such a and you actually talk about this in one of your videos, if you're going to make such a sort of conspiracy, huge worldwide conspiracy level thing here, you have got to write tens of thousands of handwritten pages,
yes,
from the same hand that looks like handwriting sufficiently enough that it copies enough other handwritings that we know are coming from like Goebbels or whoever. And,
so with Rosenberg,
not have contradictions within and all that sort of stuff. So good,
yeah. So with Rosenberg, that's absolutely correct. That would have been thousands of pages that would have had to be forged, and then they would have had to figure out. The Soviets would have had to find the handwritten pages by Goebbels and then type up and invent the remaining portions. To put on microfiche, and then it somehow matches Rosenberg's, which came far later and nobody knew about. So I guess maybe you'd have to say the Soviets had it and then leaked it to the West. And then you've also got stuff like Krista Schroeder, and she writes in her own memoirs decades after the war. She references some specific things that Hitler said. Funnily enough, the table talks, which are also referenced as being not accurate, which are things that were recorded by Bormann, also reference that exact same passage about syphilis and Christianity making people unhappy and unfree, like syphilis. So it's like now you've got three different independent sources over how many decades, over how many different people that have conflicting motivations and are in the middle of a Cold War. It just doesn't make any sense that this is not authentic, and there is no mechanism for how it is not. And like I said, the people that are the most motivated to deny this as being the case are the revisionists who have broadly accepted it. And I see somebody in the chat saying also that, like, David Irving does affirm that roughly 5 to 6 billion Jews have been murdered or were murdered. I don't know the numbers on what he's come around to. I do know that David Irving, to his credit, has adjusted his perspective to the evidence that we do have in all these different cases to some degree. So if that's the case, that's a good thing. And I'd say that's a sign of somebody that's actually looking for some accurate history.
No, that's great. So just to sort of summarize a lot of this, what we're saying is, like, there is really no good reason to deny the legitimacy, the authenticity of things like the Goebbels diary, Rosenberg's diary, and what they're saying both about the top leaders of the National Socialist movement, that they are anti-Christian, and including Hitler himself, and also that they are actually not just sort of trying to say move the Jews out of their country or just put them into camps for now during wartime or something like that, but they're actually trying to exterminate them. So that's how you would summon it.
Yes, that's right. It. And interestingly enough, you may hear things like this. You may hear people reference, well, the plan was to move them to Madagascar. Why did they want to move them to Madagascar if the plan was to kill them? And this is interesting, because what that actually is a plan that we know largely or somewhat about from the Goebbels diary itself, where I think it's in 1941, 1942, where there was some discussion about, okay, what are we going to do with them if we don't kill them? Can we send them to Madagascar? And the ultimate conclusion is
one for a moment.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. The irony of, Goebbels' diary is false. Also, here's an argument from the evidence of Goebbels' diary itself that gets away from the idea that they're just trying to kill all the Jews. All right, sorry.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, I don't actually know with that specific one if there are other evidences for that plan. I'd have to go and look at that. Maybe. But I do know for a fact that it is mentioned in Goebbels' diary. And so, yet again, it's another thing that validates it as being authentic and not made up by the Russians or something and put on microfiche. Yeah. So, regardless, it is mentioned in the Goebbels diary, but it's mentioned in, I think, 41 or 42. I could look for the specific date, but it's in that. It's before what would be considered like the height of really the extermination camps beginning the process. And the funny thing is, you'll see people pluck that out and say, okay, see, this is evidence that the plan was not to kill the Jews. And it's like, well, no, because the plan developed over time. The plan was, very hyperbolic language, like, we're going to exterminate the Jews. And then the discussion internally of, okay, well, maybe we could do something a little different. Yeah. And like, they were already killing people at the time. And when they suggested the Madagascar plan, they were much more concerned with the pragmatic component of how do we get the Jews out of here. And the ultimate conclusion really was, like, to kill them is the easiest thing. That was that's where they ended up. And one of the issues that a lot of the revisionists have had to deal with, and has only really been brought up with the same degree or with a high degree of impetus by people that have combated revisionism in the last, I don't know, like 15, 20 years, has been, where did all the Jews go that were sent east? There isn't a good mechanism for where they ended up, right? So we do know through population statistics that they drained so many of them out of Poland and Germany and these other areas. I mean, the majority of them, or not majority, but a huge percentage of them are in Poland, and they're just not there after the war. Like, the reason we have the estimate for the 6 million, which is an estimate, is that we have the before and after population numbers from censuses to determine that it went down by about 6 million. And we don't have a giant country somewhere of 6 million Jews, right? We don't have a massive increase. Yeah, right. And it's like, they didn't go to Israel. We know they didn't go to Israel at this time either. So it's like, where did they? We don't know where they went. So, like, it seems like if you go into the house, the guy says he wants to exterminate you, and you don't come out of the house, good chance he killed you. And if you don't have a good explanation, otherwise, it sounds like we should probably think that's what happened, right? Anyway.
So before we continue on, I do want to address this one right here. Raider Ashwood, crazy how barely Christian. My name is, but my title's barely Protestant. I'm Father James. Is committed to affirming the historicity of the Holocaust, but supports the genocide of Palestinians. Well, I'm not sure exactly what the argument is here. I guess like I'm okay with apparently genocide on one side, but not okay with genocide on another side. I mean, I would say that the entire uh, Hitlerian position is that genocide is okay sometimes, but not okay other times. Like if it's genocide of white people, it's now not okay. That being said, I am not at all okay with genocide, period, for any group. So that's just wrong. But also, I do find it interesting that
Yeah.
the literal argument here is that it's a bad thing to be okay with genocide sometimes and not other times, when that's literally the position of Nazism. So, all right. I
Right.
don't know if you want to add anything to that, but yeah.
No, I will say I do get a lot of DMs from people that are pretty rabidly interested in the Middle East in the modern day, and that's just not something that I share in terms of an interest.
Yeah.
Partially because I don't feel like I can ascertain what is really going on at scale in that war right now. In about 10 to 15
Yeah.
years, if I'm over here being like, oh, Israel did everything right or something, you can come find me. But I given the fog of war with that situation right now, there's a reason I don't go on Twitter and spout off often at all about Hamas or Israel.
Yeah. What I tell
you know?
people, yeah, no, what I tell people is this, like, when it comes to, I think we can recognize without question that Hamas, like, there's a lot of evil there with Hamas itself. When it comes to whether Netanyahu is being too aggressive in the war, all that sort of stuff, I'm going to delegate all of that stuff to, that is a government that is halfway across the world from me, and I don't know, I'm not there. So if you want to debate with me sort of like the intricacies of whether or not he's being too aggressive, I don't know what to say. But
Right.
the idea of, in principle, being opposed to a nation having the right to defend itself from foreign or domestic aggressors, I think that just, I mean, every Christian nationalist should be okay with a nation having not just the right, but the duty to defend itself against aggressors, both foreign and domestic. So that's what I tell people. That doesn't mean that Israel is running their war perfectly or even sufficiently fine. Like, sure, many atrocities could be happening. I'm not an Israeli, or a Palestinian or Gazan or whatever you want to call. So I can't speak on that because I'm not someone who's sort of who has a stake in it, basicly. But yeah, so I agree
You
with
don't
you
have
on that.
10,000 hours to investigate the Hamas
I
Israel
don't,
conflict. Yeah.
well, apparently now he has 10,000 hours to have studied the Holocaust and such.
Yeah.
So
You need that
he's talking about it
10,000
quite a lot
hours,
now.
Father.
Yeah, he apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's been less than 10,000 hours since he first said that, and now started talking about the Holocaust. But anyway,
Oh man. Oh man.
yeah, that's that's a fun one right there, Joel Weapon. Anyway, I want to get this one with the other Paul. He's a friend of mine. I love him. Father James, rarely Protestant. Can't watch it at the moment, sadly, but you post all of Hitler Hated Christ's best compilations of evidence on this in the description afterwards. Yeah, I'll try to make sure I do that. Not our guy, Hitler Hated Christ, already said he'll try to give me some more pieces, but so I could put it in the show notes afterwards. But I do have his X account and his YouTube channel linked, and he's got quite a few videos on his YouTube channel that really go into a lot of the stuff. So that's incredibly helpful. Let me check something.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
there's
he's
one
got a
video
Substack too.
specifically. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
one video specifically on my YouTube channel where I address Corey Maller on the Hitler being a Christian question, and
yeah,
that's actually pretty in depth for in just 45 minutes to an hour. But I did just send you, Father James, the link to my Substack super thread, which contains just kind of like pretty much all the evidence from the theological side of things around that.
Mhm.
Now, if you guys are interested in specifics with the Goebbels diary, I could definitely send you some things. My DMs are open on Twitter. I haven't done a giant thread specifically on the validation of the Goebbels diary, but I'll be honest, most of this is on an extremely well-cited Wikipedia page about the Goebbels diary. So if you just actually read that and read the citations that are included, pretty much all of this is in there. So.
No, awesome. Appreciate it. And it's important to note that Wikipedia itself, yes, can be bad at times when it actually has good citations, and you can check the citations themselves.
Exactly.
It's like a college paper. A college paper, it could be good or bad, you know? So you got to look at the actual citations. That's what I use Wikipedia for. I say, okay, let's look at what primary sources we can find, and then I go from there. Anyway. Let's talk about Hitler being a Christian or not. So oftentimes what I hear is there is this narrative that the claim is that Hitler did not believe in God and was an atheist. And that's just abundantly, obviously, very much not true. He's not someone who denies the existence of any understanding of God whatsoever.
Right.
But then the sort of other side is like, well, no, he's not an atheist, so therefore he is a Christian. So can we talk about that? What's the evidence concerning the religiosity of Hitler himself?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Dr. Wiechart has come down on the perspective that Hitler was sort of a pantheist / panentheist, which is a little bit of a weird distinction. I believe it's the difference between God being all things and God being in all things, but still being tied to things intrinsically.
Yeah. So pantheism is the belief that God is the universe.
Okay.
And panentheism is I'm a philosophy undergrad, so I've got this stuff.
Epic. Let's go.
Panentheism. The panentheism is the belief that God sort of like the universe emanates from God himself. So there's still there's an ontological connection, but still somewhat of a sort of personal separation in sort of identity, to where you can have a difference of identity. Whereas pantheism is God and the universe are one and the same. The universal mind is the universe, and the universe is the universal mind, kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so that distinction, he kind of goes back and forth between those. But just to like fire off some stuff real quick, and this is all in that super thread that you will link with this, is in a speech, and again, this is in a public speech. Again, it's recorded by one individual, but it's in a public speech. On January 30th, 1943, he references nature using the term omnipotent or all-powerful when referencing nature, which seems to be, I think that would raise some pretty serious red flags around anyone that was theologically inclined. He does it again, actually recorded by, he said that in a speech, and then Bormann sort of mimics this, I think in February of 44, he also references nature as being omnipotent and how he's sort of in alignment with Hitler on that specific topic. There's a lot of discussion also and these are all public things that Hitler said, about the source of morality for the Germans being the Volk itself. That, let me see if I could find that specific reference.
I'm sending some stuff out and fixing up the
oh, you're good.
Show notes while you're looking things up. All right, go ahead.
So October of 35, and then later on March of 36. So this is actually relatively early on, like before the war. You know, Hitler says in a public speech, and this conscience, meaning his, has but one single commander, the Volk. So he's saying that he's accountable only to the people, that his moral compass is aligned to the people itself alone. He then goes on to say, the Volk alone is our Lord, which is Herr, and we serve this Volk according to our best knowledge and conscience. Interestingly enough, I think all nouns are capitalized in German, so it's kind of weird to figure out what is or isn't supposed to be capitalized. But I will say that even National Socialists that translate that speech do translate Lord in that speech to be a capital L. So that's a little interesting. The voice of the Volk, which is the voice of God. So this is kind of reverberating some more ancient language surrounding the sort of will of the people concept. And then just straight up saying, and this is the 36 quote, I have one great faith, and that is faith in my Volk. So he's establishing his perspective on morality, where that's derived from. We know from Goebbels' diary in 1941 that he considered the Sermon on the Mount to not be a morality that was suitable for Germans in their time. So,
Interesting.
This is the full quote in December 14th, 1941. Christianity is Jewish in its entire essence. A religion that proceeds from the principle that one should love his enemies, may not kill, and must offer the left cheek when struck on the right one, is not suitable for a manly doctrine of defending one's fatherland. Christianity is in fact a doctrine of decay. For a modern person, it deserves only intellectual disdain. And this conversation is recorded by both Rosenberg and Goebbels.
Interesting. And this is with Hitler himself?
That is Hitler's statement. That is verbatim according to Goebbels' diary. And then Rosenberg records that same conversation. Those are both in the pin thread, or the thread on my Substack.
Which I put in the show notes now, so it should be there for those who are watching live and obviously later and such. So we do see a rejection of Christianity and stuff. And in your video, you talk about, for instance, images where he is like taken. There's a picture taken of him coming out of a church.
Right.
The cross is then erased later on. So it seems that there is some sort of disdain for Christianity within. Now, what is the evidence for a sort of pagan, or really more accurately neo-pagan influence upon Hitler and the National Socialists?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would actually come down on this probably not as strong as some people. I don't believe that Hitler was in any sort of structured sense a neo-pagan or a pagan.
Okay.
So I don't think that his perspective, although it might have aligned with some affection for sort of a love of might and power and what kind of became defined as Nietzschean later, that is shared with pagans, I don't think that he really was a structured pagan in the sense that he was going to start worshiping Odin or something, right? In fact, I believe he mocks, and I don't know the reference for this off the top of my head, but I know it's valid. It's not made up, that he even mocks Himmler for some of his more neo-pagan beliefs and activities. So I don't think he was that. I also, interestingly enough, he even talks about Christianity as being flawed in that it's not built on a scientific foundation when it comes to race. I think he talks about the Catholic Church on that specifically. That leads to me to believe that he may actually be a little bit more of a hyper-pragmatist, kind of scientific Redditor a little bit, who's got some like pantheism mixed into it. That kind of makes a lot more sense to me than the perspective that he was a neo-pagan. So
Hitler was not a 6-day creationist.
No, I definitely not a 6-day. Definitely not a young Earth creation. Definitely not Ken Ham over here. Yeah.
What's funny, just a side note, is I grew up independent fundamental Baptist, so Ken Ham was actually the moderate. Kent Hovind was the one that we actually.
Oh, Dr. Dynamo over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was before his, many jailings and many divorce. Actually, I think he was only jailed once, to be fair to him. But then his many divorces and remarriage and all this sort of stuff. Anyway,
the tax fraud. The tax fraud will always get you, bro. Yeah.
Oh yeah. The IRS. They don't care if you kill anyone, but if you don't give them their money, they will. Oh yeah. So yeah, I think that's an important point to bring up, because oftentimes the group here that loves or sort of defends Hitler will talk about the evils of things like evolution, and it's often ignored that Hitler himself, it seems, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like his position is being in part justified by a sort of evolutionary approach to the human race.
Yeah, that's correct. So so his perspective, I kind of jokingly said he was a Redditor. I don't think he was really a Redditor in any kind of real sense. But his complaint about the Christianity not being scientific kind of rung like that to my ear. Yeah. But he does talk about how how nature has a will. So he does talk about that, and some people have interpreted that as him kind of asserting a natural law perspective on things.
Yeah.
I'm a reform guy, and I actually lean a little bit more Van Tillian than I do natural law. So for me, that's not.
No,
Yeah, I know. I know you wouldn't. But so that's one of those things that I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not really into that sphere enough to handle that question directly. But I do think that the way he talks about nature is both simultaneously definitely evolutionary. Definitely survival of the fittest as being a moral value. Like he views eugenic science as having some sort of actual moral ethos to it that's positive. And then he also mysticizes it by talking about it as having a will. And I think a lot of times people interpret his discussion of the will of nature as being natural law theory, when it really may just be more materialistic, like a idea of like the will of Mother Nature to like produce strong offspring and that kind of thing.
It really sounds more like Hegelian, honestly.
It's very much like that. Yes, it's a lot more in that vein. But he does mystifize it in the sense that, like, I do think that he considered like spiritual belief to be of some value, but it's always, he frames everything always pragmatically. So when he talks about these things, it's always like, what's the best for the like this best for the Volk, because the Volk can better conceptualize their duty to the fatherland if they view the nature as being spiritual, right? So he even talked about how he wanted to replace a monastery that was on a mountain that he knew about growing up with a glass dome, so that people could like look at the universe instead of looking at like the saints and the statues and stuff, because he thought that was antiquated. Whereas nature was so much more pure and noble and uplifting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have noticed, and there's nothing wrong, obviously, with this, but I have noticed a very strong love for nature in a lot of these groups. And again, like, love for nature is great. Don't get me wrong. But it is interesting to notice that sort of strong love and veneration even of nature. You actually pointed to a line from Corey Mahler, one of his, I guess, more older WordPress articles or Substack or something like that, where he talks about there something to the effect of like there's nothing wrong with the worship of nature itself. Or something like that.
Oh yeah, this is an old one. Oh man, I don't have that one handy, but I could dig it out. Remind me after the show, and I'll DM it to you. You can throw it in the show notes. But it's something to that effect, where it was like he's talking about our ancestors being pagan, and how, and I think he even says that they were not misguided in their worship of nature.
That was it.
I think that's the exact
their love for and even worship of nature or something like that.
Yes. And then he changes it later. He actually went back and edited it. And interestingly enough, he put footnotes for things he edited on that article, except that one. That one he just changed when people noticed it. But anyway, you are correct. There's definitely a sort of vitalist influence in a lot of these circles. You see that with like raw egg nationalists and some of these other guys that have kind of gotten all up in this zone where weirdly enough, it also pretty quickly gets sexually perverse when you get into that zone, because sexuality is definitely part of nature, and you get some.
That's where we get that's where we get the woe part of that, you know.
Well, that's a whole nother topic, but yeah.
I don't encourage anyone to actually look up those posts from Woe, but it's not it's very much not godly. Anyway, so it seems Hitler. One other point to bring up. This one kind of very much frustrates me, because one of the arguments I do hear is that now they won't explicitly say this part, but like sort of the mind behind it is like, well, even if he's not a Christian, he's trying to bring us back to a sort of pre-modern way of doing things.
Right.
I have my own thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on that? On the idea that he's bringing us back to a sort of pre-modern way of ruling nations, even if he himself is not a Christian per se.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I feel like especially if you're a self-described Christian nationalist, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, or the bottom of the barrel. But I will say, so he did have a lot of veneration for Rome. For a lot of different reasons, which I don't want to go into a lot of the detail on right now, but he had a lot of veneration for Rome, And I think if you study sort of the culture of pre-Christian Rome, you will come to the conclusion as a Christian that pre-Christian European or Southern European, whatever societies are not exactly God honoring, even if they may appear to be superior to random heathens that you find around the planet. Actually, do you know who Michael Jones is? Inspiring Philosophy on YouTube. You're familiar with that guy?
Yeah, Michael Jones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he has a YouTube channel, and he released a video pretty recently about how children were viewed in the ancient world, and he gives examples from Rome. And one of the examples he gives, which I was in the gym, and I think I let out like an audible like wow when he said this, was the way that we find brothels in the ancient world when we do architecture. Do you know how we find them? Sounds like you do.
Yeah, the skeletal remains of children, of babies.
Exactly. So we find the mass remains of infants because it was common practice in the pre-Christian Roman world to just kill babies, and this was documented all over the place. It's just really not possible to deny it. There are sort of glimmers of this even in things that Hitler said as early as 1929 about infanticide being potentially beneficial to the German population, kind of like with Sparta, so I think the exact quote, and I believe this is either Wagner or a correspondence letter, which I don't have off the top of my head right here. But he talks about weaklings and runts and sick individuals, and how if they were killed as children, that this would actually uplift the German race and things like this.
Yeah.
And that's very early Hitler again. So I don't really prescribe a ton of that to that. But it is a reflection of sort of his view of what the ideal was. And even if it was, pre-modern, if we're anti-moderns, it was not Christian by any stretch of the imagination. I think that we need to recognize that just because it's trad does not mean that it's honoring to God,
Yeah, the pagan Roman Empire at the end of the day is still the pagan Roman Empire. It doesn't matter that it's not, San Francisco. Although some parts are very much like San Francisco. Which is another sort of interesting thing that puts that now. Which leads to another part is that, again, I'm trying to give every sort of excuse or sort of counter argument that I've seen and heard. Let's say, he's not a Christian, but he's actually fighting against the moral decay that was happening during the Weimar Republic. So there is sodomy going, there's even transgender stuff going on in the 20s and 30s and all that, and done by, quote, the Jews and all that. So what's the response to this?
Yeah, so it's really difficult because the period was recorded largely by the state, acceptable record keepers and things like this for the period in Germany. It is difficult to ascertain to what degree the depravity was going on in Weimar. Now, I will say, before the Nazis rose to power, and they documented a lot of it, there are things that did document how horrible Weimar Germany was. And I think that a component of the reactionary moral thought in the German population was not wrong. I don't think that was entirely wrong. I think that they were seeing things that were deeply wrong in Weimar Germany. Okay. And even certain book burnings, I think, were a reaction to this. Now, the prideful, the sort of ethnic pride plus tying all people of Jewish genetic descent to that depravity is where things really started to go off the rails. And some of that was set up early. Some of that came in the late 20s and early 30s. But there's a reason why I haven't gone and defended the weird sex books that were burned in the early stages of the National Socialist movement. I'll just put it like that. And the thing is, I don't think that the only example we have of a society that didn't have weird transgender nonsense is that specific 10-year period of Nazi German rule. I think we have a lot of examples where we were not mass murdering people, and we also were able to sustain a society that was not that depraved. And there have been other people that have done some theological work on some of the reasons for Weimar Germany being that depraved, and it does seem like that period, especially prior to Nazi Germany, did have a pretty serious drop off in religious adherence, which, interestingly enough, spikes initially when Hitler comes to power and then drops pretty hard again right after. And I've posted about
interesting.
Yeah.
So with this, let me think. All right, we're seeing this in part a sort of fight against some of the debauchery and all that's happening within the Weimar Republic, but interestingly enough, some of that, as you're saying, is based upon sort of official documents from the state itself. But then we're also told not to trust anything from the state today. But
right, that's exactly right.
So with this, we do see an actual repulsion against sort of sodomy and, quote, transgenderism and all that sort of stuff from Hitler. Would that be, where do you think that is coming from, I guess you could say?
I think for Germans, it probably was a biblical framework initially, and I think a lot of them maintained that while sort of, if they even knew about it, turning a blind eye to a lot of the atrocities. I think that what's really to be learned from Nazi Germany is not don't be intolerant. I think that's a really stupid message that the left has sort of added to that period. The real lesson to learn from Nazi Germany is how initially righteous reactions to things that would be correctly considered immoral can be perverted through pride. And I think that's ultimately what happened in Nazi Germany, where you had a population that still had vestiges of, or relatively large vestiges of Christian culture, that was seeing a lot of depraved activity going on, and the reaction to it was misguided. And when Hitler comes along and the National Socialists rise to power, they grab on to the humiliation that the Germans felt after World War I, really amped up the pride and integrated a lot of these nasty ideologies into it. And because the German people were looking to have their ego really inflamed to some degree, or placated, they were willing to go along with it. And this is why I think that Hitler himself is so worthy of repudiation as an individual, is because I do believe that if someone like Hitler had not come along in Germany in that period, the reaction to those things that were going on in Weimar may not have resulted in such horrible mass death as well as the destruction of their country. But because he came along and realized how to take advantage of the desire for pride in that population, it really like was a massive harm to his own people, ultimately, their souls as well.
All right, one more question, or sort of subtopic, and then we'll get to any questions if there are any. Guys, if you have any questions, please ask them. And I see one already, so yeah, please ask them. Super chats will be prioritized and all that. I appreciate this. But one question I have to ask has to do with the church at this time. And insofar as you know, could you talk about the 19th century German church? We're talking Lutheran, Roman Catholic, etc.
I will tell you initially that I am not an expert in that area, and so I really don't want to talk on that topic. I do know, like I said, that under Weimar there was some serious waning of institutional religious affiliation that did spike under Hitler. I also do know that the anti-Semitism that pre-existed National Socialism was much more based around a religious perspective on practicing Jews and not just genetically Jewish people. And so that's kind of an interesting jumping off point as well, in terms of, for people that want to say that that Luther was the direct reason for Nazi anti-Semitism. I don't necessarily believe that's the case. I think there was a pretty big disconnect there. And I also believe that based on based on some of the propaganda that I've seen that came out of Nazi Germany, there was a concerted effort to convince Germans that that Jews were intrinsically evil and needed to be punished and driven out, ultimately to be killed, based on their genetics and not just like their religious affiliation. There's a real famous cartoon that I've shared, dozens of times at this point, where it's like a Jewish guy coming out of a church and he looks all, real gnarly and gross. And he's like looking at some pretty girls across the street, like he's coming out of a Christian church, and he's like, caption is, baptism did not make him a non-Jew. And so the whole point of this sort of propaganda is to infuse in the population, which may have a perspective that was inherited from Luther, that Judaism was pernicious on the basis of religion, to say, no, it's pernicious on the basis of their very essence and their genetics. And that is so repulsive to me, because it's such a denial of the idea of regeneration, completely, changing a person. But they were primed for it, and I don't think it was necessarily just by Luther. I think they were looking for an enemy they could blame at that point as well.
Yeah, so I would point out in the 19th century, you definitely have a German liberal philosophical and theological tradition. Just two examples for that. Obviously, with the philosophical tradition, one that I would point to would be obviously Hegel. And then the theological tradition, definitely Schleiermacher. I mean, he's like sort of the father of liberalism. But there is this push towards a more liberal approach to the Christian faith, outright denial of things like the deity of Christ, or the idea of God as personal, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so, and that is true. And sorry, just real quick aside, one thing that is interesting, and I'm not a real defender of why am I blanking on his name right now? Bonhoeffer. Thank you. Bonhoeffer? I could. I'm not a big defender of Bonhoeffer. I'm not a defender of
him either.
But I will say, compared to the lineage of his theological study and how liberal the German church had become, he was actually kind of considered relatively conservative, which I think is funny. Especially because we look back at him now and consider him not. I think rightfully we consider him non-conservative, but anyway.
Agreed. Yeah, it's funny because exactly what you're saying. I was going to actually bring that up, is that people look at Bonhoeffer, in these sort of circles that we're talking about, the sort of pro-Hitler circles, and they're like, oh, look, this is your hero and he's so liberal. I'm like, well, no, actually, no, it's a bit more complicated than that. I consider him, and a lot of people I know consider him, quite liberal,
right?
And he's but at this by the same token, compared to the actual German theologians, he's actually relatively conservative. It's like N.T. Wright in the Church of England. I consider him liberal because he is liberal, but compared to the rest of the Church of England, he's like a fundamentalist almost.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think that's a good context to have. But once again, there's a reason I'm not going out and posting about him, Bonhoeffer, all the time either. Like that's not my guy, because I do have some issues with him. And funnily enough, one of the best articles I've read about that topic, especially because it's from somebody that I can kind of trust, is Dr. Wickart once again, and he did a really good explanation of all the areas that he had some issues with, things like inerrancy, as well as he sort of had some conjecture about the historicity of the resurrection and some things like this that are absolutely concerning later in his life. So
no, agreed. All right, so let's go ahead. We have a few questions here. Don't forget to ask your questions. Just type them out on the page here, or on the comments here. Where was it? Well, this one's not quite a question. David Wilson's bringing it up. World War I was hugely traumatic on Europe and destroyed the faith of many. I agree, definitely. I think that's something that should be spoken of. There's this often simplification I see with a lot of the revisionists concerning World War II today, where almost like everything was hunky-dory prior to World War I. Yes. Or, sorry, prior to World War II, and then except for maybe the Weimar Republic or whatever, and then just like a light switch, everything just went dark, and the post-war consensus made like everything haywire. I go, no, there's definitely a regression that is happening. There are different points to start it with, but one of the major points is, at least for Germany, the 19th century, with the push of things like, well, you've got obviously Karl Marx, you've got Hegel, you've got, Schopenhauer after him, of course, but you've got Schleiermacher, you've got all of these liberal minds who are pushing, and Germany is the intellectual center of Europe at the 19th century. So it's much more of a regression from these
Right.
minds that are coming way before World War II. So this is
Well,
and one of the steps for that is my point is that World War One is a major push for this as well.
yes, and there was a lot of like highly nihilistic stuff, and we'll never know even how much World War One affected Hitler personally, because I mean he fought in
Yeah,
World War One, right? And so
yeah,
there's even conjecture on all sorts of things that he decided or didn't decide on tactically with the use of the SS and different things based on his experience in World War One. But one thing you find funny, because you do mention the post-war consensus, is, I mean, people do talk about like, okay, well, after World War II, it's just been so downhill since then. The first half of the 20th century, um, even basic things like church attendance and what would be
yeah.
considered like religious adherence was on the decline in the United States, and it explodes after World War II.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's waning now in our age, very unfortunately,
Yeah.
up and down. But the idea that that the result of World War II in the entire Western world was a rejection of Christianity in some kind of way or something is so false. And the same thing surrounding how we treated communism. People completely forget we fought an entire Cold War. And I say we fought a Cold War because Korea, I mean, like my grandfather fought in Korea. So it's like,
Mine too.
yeah. Oh, awesome. There you go. Yeah. So that's one of those things that's people's perspective. Weirdly enough, as much as they talk about how, we need to get out from under World War II and how it's like influenced our perspective on today so much, I feel like the people that say that are often people whose own perspective is so influenced by World War II that the only thing they think that has mattered in the last 80 years is that, and that's just so blatantly false.
Yeah. Actually, to be fair, I don't remember when this sermon was preached, but I think it was from the 30s or 20s, maybe. It's from Harry Emerson Fosdick, which is a well-known liberal preacher, theologian from the first half of the 20th century. And he actually had a sermon called The Danger of Worshiping Jesus.
Okay.
So this is something that's going way beyond or way before the World War II sort of results and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
See, the name asks, to what extent did eugenics inspire Nazi policies?
So that's a good question. I know that Dr. Wiechart would say that Darwinism, he draws a pretty direct line between Darwinism and Nazi policy. I think it influenced it largely because it was, to be considered scientific, it was what you adhered to in that day. That was beginning to come on full force. But I don't know if fundamentally that was the driving force behind Nazi policy, largely because I don't think the concern, like they did believe they were the master race, and in that sense, they wanted to preserve the master race. But their logic to conclude that also wasn't necessarily sound. So I have a hard time saying that they were operating on a scientific foundation, because I think that if you were objectively assessing people groups by genetic and their achievements, you would probably not go after the Jews in terms of considering them inferior. At least, yeah. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I think that the Darwinistic stuff was probably just available more than anything, and it was an excuse for what they were already inclined to. But there's other people that are very
for a foregone conclusion. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But there are other people that would disagree with me on that and draw a much clearer line. And I think those are both totally valid perspectives. It's almost like you can have differing perspectives between people doing historical research.
Really? There's not one narrative that you have to follow to the T?
Oh, really? Exactly right. Yeah, that's crazy.
They're just not called anti-Semites for diverging even a little bit. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, first, Stephen Martyr said, so Hitler led the people astray. I don't know if you want to. I guess.
Yeah, no. Well, he says, so Hitler led the people astray, and then his next one is the ground was ready for him, though. And I think that's totally true.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's totally true. I will say that Goebbels even writes in, I forget what I think this is just one of his personal short writings about Hitler, where he says Adolf Hitler is not only regarded in the party as its first and supreme leader, he really is. National Socialism is unthinkable without him or even against him. This is one of the reasons why I think that if I'm talking about the theological beliefs of Nazism, I have to directly address Adolf Hitler, because some people will say, well, that it was just Hitler, but that's not really representative of National Socialism. No, the thought leaders themselves all unanimously agreed that the embodiment of Nazism was Adolf Hitler. He was not separable from that movement, and that's one of the reasons why I do think that it's completely valid to consider him so deeply evil, is because without him, I do think that we would have had a very, very, very different 20th century, and very likely Germany would not have come out so in such a wretched state, both in their experience and also their what they perpetrated.
All right, let's see. I want to get to this one here. What we aren't mentioning here is international banking. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, so this is all, I mean, that was all in Hitler's rhetoric about the Jews. There's a lot of people that kind of go off on this and will say that even Hitler was a Rothschild and that this was all part of the plan or something of the big banks. I'll be honest, my reaction,
World War II.
My reaction to the big banking stuff is this kind of my same as when I get DMs about people trying to sell me Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, or buying gold. It's there's probably an influence. I don't doubt there's an influence, but it's so impossible to dissect what degree it was at this point, and there's too many schizos that I can't sort through it. So sorry, I can't help you on that.
Weimar was a big party to drown their sorrows. Okay.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying. So, kind of like post Civil War thing. So I agree. Like when you are on the losing end of a war, justly or unjustly, and I think you and I would probably both agree that Germany was given quite the short end of the stick after World War I, right?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, I think that's true, and I also think what's funny to me is I feel like if these guys really wanted to have a revisionist perspective that is aligned with what I consider moral reality, you could absolutely argue that the U.S. should not have entered World War I, and that would have prevented World War II potentially, maybe. And so, but they don't do that. Generally, the argument is just entering World War II being not the right course of action.
I believe that World War I is one of the worst things that happened, probably the worst thing that happened in the 20th century, because it leads to World War II in part, but just in and of itself, it's a horrible war itself also. And I don't think we, it's, I mean, like, you could look at the ultimate damage of World War II, like, ultimately it is worse, but my point being that World War I happens, which leads to World War II. If that makes sense. Maybe I'm just whatever. But the point being that, I don't think we should have. I probably don't think we should have gone to World War I. Like we as Americans, we should not have been involved in it. Just sort of, they have to work their own things out, kind of thing. But also Germany being given the short end of the stick and all that. Like these things have consequences, and you can be sympathetic towards the plight of Germany, the massive inflation to try to pay off the debt and all that sort of stuff, without then saying, therefore, we need to kill all the Jews. Just, Vatican II probably harmed the faith of Roman Catholics more than World War II. I'll say this really quickly as a theologian, as an Anglican. I would say, as an Anglican, I would say Vatican II in many ways is better than pre-Vatican II. As far as the Roman Catholic Church, Vatican II has brought Roman Catholicism closer to Protestantism in their theology, not sort of necessarily explicitly, but indirectly. The problem that happens is that it has also brought them into a lot of liberalism too. So there's good and bad. It's a two-edged sword, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't really have a really strong opinion on this. I will say that I struggle to not associate the fruit that I see from certain beliefs spiritually with the beliefs themselves. And I will say that a lot of the people that seem to be vehemently against Vatican II are also the people that are in my DMs that are talking about Hitler as a Catholic Christian prince.
Yeah.
But I know there's a lot of individuals that are against Vatican II that are not in that bucket. And I'm not a
Unless you're
Catholic.
Corey Muller, then it's actually very obviously he was a Lutheran prince,
Yes.
Christian prince. Yes.
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's So I don't really have a real opinion on that, but I agree with what you're saying based on what I know about it becoming somewhat closer to Protestantism in some regards. I think the Catholic Church as a whole is a lot more liberal than it is presented as on the internet.
Yeah. You got a question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Boris said Hitler is not a bad guy. I'm not sure the context of that. Do you understand what's being said there?
No.
Oh, I know who this is. Okay, I get that. Okay, it's kind of an inside joke, but also somewhat concerning. Anyway, the name. I've heard that Hitler was possessed. What do you think about this?
Oh man,
You don't have to comment if you don't want to.
I'm trying to think about how to answer this without. Oh no! I mean, I'm trying to think of how to answer this without it being like real Jordan Peterson, right? So, I think
he had the Volk in him, the Volk, but the bad Volk.
Yeah, I think there's a very thin line between ideological possession and demonic possession. I think that's actually true, and I don't really know where that line is, especially biblically. But I will say it's hard to say. I think if you were using biblical language to describe Hitler in his speeches, vehemently affirming that he wanted to wipe the Jews out or destroy the Jews or whatever verb he uses at different occasions, it's hard to not understand him as being possessed by a certain spirit. Whether that means he is demonically possessed in the way that we would interpret certain passages in Scripture, or even in even how you would see presented in a more Catholicized context, maybe in like a horror movie or something, right? I think that I don't think that it was necessarily that, but I do think that you could say that he was possessed by a spirit of ethnic vainglory and ethnic malice. And whether that's a demonic possession, I could leave up to you guys to decide. But I think that's how I'd say it.
All right, this looks like it's the last question. Hyperinflation and reparations were also a factor, were they not?
Yes, absolutely. After World War I, and they one thing that is talked about too, which I talk about in my really long video, which will be coming out about Stone Choir and the Holocaust, is you'll often hear this discussed about the German economic miracle of World War II, or right before World War II, where it was this utopia economically, and they turned the whole thing around. This is sort of true to the extent that things were improved in the short term. But for a collective group that is against usury, it is ironic that the reason for that was that the entire economy was juiced up out of its mind on over-leveraged debt and bonds.
Yeah.
And like the reason they were able to fund the entire war machine was because of just some extreme
what? You there?
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Can you hear me? All right, you're there. Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Anyway, I was going to say that they did not. Am I still coming in and out?
Yeah, you're going. You're good.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
They did have hyperinflation. They corrected it in the short term by juicing up the economy, and then they basically lost the war before the chickens came home to roost. That's what happened. So.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost a Keynesian approach, which is interestingly very liberal, but anyway. So yeah, it looks like that's all of them. Let's see. Okay, one more interesting one. Rapture happens after Trib, the second coming. Well, I'm not a dispensationalist. That's actually something I forgot to ask before. Do you consider yourself a dispensationalist? Do you believe that Israel is some sort of like uniquely still God's chosen people as a nation or whatever, that there's some continuity? Do you have anything like that in your theology?
I don't think there's continuity with Old Testament Israel in the sense that I do think that the church is to be interpreted as that today.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do agree with Calvin and some of the reformers about the special, the likelihood of a special part to play of the Jews in the future end times. Now, go ahead.
Would you consider yourself historic pre-mill then, or no?
No, so this is another area where I really don't like to put myself in one camp, not because I'm trying to ride the fence, but just because I haven't looked
Yeah.
into it to the degree that I would want
Okay.
to draw a conclusion. I really like a lot of the amillennial stuff. I think a lot of the
Okay.
amill people are very sane, and that's kind of why I'm attracted to it. But I do not believe it. I'm not a dispensationalist. I do not believe that
Okay.
Israel today, that we have some sort of requirement as Christians to support the nation state
Yeah.
of Israel on biblical grounds. I don't think that that's a good interpretation.
Agreed. So I bring that up only because the early church actually did believe that there was some eschatological significance to Israel, to Jews, I should say,
Right.
ethnic Jews, to where there's going to be some massive repentance and return, that they come to Christ and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, you and I would both agree that there is no salvation apart from Christ himself, that there are not two
Yes.
paths to salvation. One is the law, one is
Right.
Christ himself. No, we believe that there's not a theological sort of continuity of like the old Israel kingdom and the current Israel
Right.
nation state or whatever. Yeah.
Well, real quick though, I want to provide a
Hmm.
distinction here that let me defend some dispies.
Yeah. Okay.
So I grew up Baptist, Southern Baptist, and I have several family
Yeah.
members that are still Baptist or Southern Baptist
Mm-hmm.
churches, and the interesting thing that the thing that I found interesting when people started this discussion more recently and aligned it with, or really got involved politically with this conversation in the last couple of years, was this idea that dispensationalists believed that Jews were saved on the basis of their ethnic heritage, and that there, and I had known hundreds of dispensationalists growing up, and I had never heard this. And when I expressed this to people, they were like shocked that who were dispensationalists, they were shocked that this was something people believed. And I have not been able to find almost anyone that claims to be a dispensationalist, with the exception of John Hagee, who's like a televangelist,
Yeah.
that actually believes this. So if somebody does and they want to steelman that, I would love to hear it, but I don't know where those people are.
So I heard it growing up, not very often, but sometimes.
Oh, you were IFB, so maybe
enough,
you did have some kooky stuff.
yeah. As an IFB, I don't think I'm trying to remember if I ever heard it explicitly from like the pulpit, but I'm pretty sure there was at least one or two preachers who had a mindset at least very close to that, where essentially, yeah, just actually, I have one, but I don't want to give the name of the person. I do remember actually hearing now that I think about it. But so yeah, yeah.
I will take your word for it that it does exist in those contexts, because I did not grow up IFB, and so that is, I will say, is very concerning. I will still say that, at least from my perspective, which is the only perspective that I've got here, that I do think it's exaggerated to the extent that is in the church. So. Anyway.
It certainly was not a majority position for even me as an IFB. I'm just saying I had heard it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. All right. Okay, and he's saying that's straw man against the disputes. Yeah. Again, like what we're saying is like that's not a prominent like majority position. I'm just saying that I grew up with some people saying that, mostly lay people, to be fair, but right. I do remember at least one pastor I know who did say that, who did believe that.
I grew up around like the Ted Cruz type of thing more, where like, you know, where he's all like, okay, well, we have to side with Israel because of this Old Testament passage, and I think that that's wrong. I think that clouds their judgment. I do think if you ask Ted Cruz, like, do we have to support them even if they're doing evil things, he'd say no. But I do think that it clouds his judgment. So.
That was one thing I do want to bring up here. So Chivalry Bob, the atrocities of Israel are well documented, and those who deny them are promoting genocide. I don't think so. I'm not someone who's saying, again, like as I said before, I'm not uh, speaking authoritatively on these sorts of things when it comes to the Israel-Gaza war. I am not well versed in it. I'm just going based on what I know itself, and if there are actual atrocities being committed by Israel, well, I condemn that wholeheartedly. So that
Right.
has pretty much nothing to do with what we're talking about today, though. Just
I would say too
it is
to wrap it
yeah,
around to what we are talking about. I
yeah,
try to be as charitable as possible to people that I have discovered that were in Nazi Germany or in other countries that were
yeah,
associated with Nazi Germany at the time, um,
yeah,
who did not speak out against what was going
mhm,
on because there was a fog of war during the period. And so
yeah.
I am applying, I think, that same charity to others for historic events that I am expecting to be extended to me when it comes to talking about what's going on right this very minute in the
Hmm.
Middle East. So, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, that looks like it's it. Let me just check. Okay, I guess one more if you don't mind. Do you think Hitler's thousand-year Reich was supposed to be a literal thousand-year? I guess it's a. I don't know.
A millennialist question
Uh,
about the thousand-year
yeah,
Reich.
I guess
That's
it's kind
really
of tongue in
funny.
cheek. I'm presuming, but yeah.
That's
A
awesome.
literal 1,000 years. If it was 1,000 years in one day, it's wrong.
You
The
need to
prophecy was wrong.
whoever said that needs to tweet that and then DM it to me and I will retweet that because that's really funny.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry. One more. Is there any evidence that Hitler was actually into the occult?
This
Uh,
is another one that I'd say probably not. There is a book out
okay.
there, or there's a lot of books out there about this, and I know that Will Spencer kind of disagrees with me on this. If you know who that guy is,
Uh,
but I think broadly, no, I don't think that he was actually into the occult. I think there were people in his inner circle that were a little bit, but I don't think that was a serious influence. So
would that be what Himmler or um? Oh,
Himmler would be
what's it?
the so Himmler was more neo-pagan. I'd really have to like look again
Okay.
because the
Okay.
for the same reason that like I mentioned about like the banking stuff where it's just like there's too many schizos
Mhm.
to be able
Yeah.
to really get into it
Yeah.
well without a lot of time. The occult stuff is kind of like that where it's like there's just so much bull and crazy people
Yeah.
that it's very difficult to ascertain what's going on. But my belief based on what I've studied is that he wasn't influenced by that directly.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Not Our Guy, for being on here. I hope everyone has enjoyed this live stream, and I hope you have a good evening and good weekend, or whatever time it is that you're watching this later. And God bless. End stream. Oh, there we go.